Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our Holy Week Daily Devotional. This is Tuesday. Today we're going to continue looking at John chapter 12. Now the whole theme for this series of devotionals is to address a question that comes up in Matthew chapter 21. When Jesus first arrives in Jerusalem, this is the last week of his life before he is crucified on the cross. He arrives and a huge crowd gathers, and people are asking the question, who is this? And so that's a question that I want us to continue to focus on as we go through these readings on our way to the cross, on our way to Friday. So today we're looking in John chapter 12, verses 20 to 36. So I'll read this text, and then we'll see if there are some details or some ideas in the text here that might address this question of who Jesus is and what is he up to here. John chapter 12, starting in verse 20. Now among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. Now they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we would like to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew, and Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their lives will lose them, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled. What should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven and said, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." The crowd standing there heard it. And some said it was thunder. Others said, "Oh, an angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered, "This voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out, and I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to indicate the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd answered him, "We've heard from the law that the Messiah remains forever. How can you say that the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is this Son of Man?" Jesus said to them, "The light is with you a little longer, while you have the light, so that the darkness may not overtake you. If you walk in the darkness, you will not know where you are going. While you have the light, believe in the light, so that you may become children of light." After Jesus had said this, he departed and hid from them. So there are all kinds of things coming up in this text, some things that are kind of unusual. If you read it, it sounds very much like they're asking Jesus questions, and he just isn't answering any one of his questions. They ask Jesus a question, and then the answer comes, and it's even more confusing than the first. And it starts right at the beginning. John says that some Greeks came. Now this might not be politically correct in today's day and age, but what John is describing here are people that are of a Greek heritage or from a Greek ethnic background, but they're people that are intrigued by the one true God. They're here in Jerusalem during a Passover feast. So it suggests that they're people that are intrigued by God. They have heard about the Jewish community. They have perhaps even heard readings from the Old Testament. And so they're intrigued by the Jewish faith and the Jewish culture. And so they remain ethnically Greek. They haven't been proselytized and made part of the Greek or the Jewish community. But they're God seekers. And so these Greek people come and they talk to Philip. And now you might ask, okay, well, why did they pick Philip? Well, Philip is a Greek-sounding name, and so it's quite possible that Philip might be bilingual, or he might be a person at least who has some connections within this Greek community. So they seek out somebody that's similar to them, or someone that they might know. And they've got a question. They want to see Jesus. Can we get some time with Jesus? Can you introduce us? Can you build a bridge? And for whatever reason, Philip checks in with Andrew. He's one of the tighter disciples, one of the inner circle that Jesus surrounded himself with. And then the two of them go and approach Jesus. So can these Greek guys come and talk to Jesus? And right out of the gate, the first answer that Jesus gives is, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." That doesn't even sound like it's an answer to the question. So, what does that even mean? It's important to understand, or to perhaps have an awareness throughout the Gospel of John, that this is a change from what Jesus typically says about the time being right. Again and again in John's Gospel, in chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, Jesus frequently has this answer. When his mom comes to him in chapter 2 asking about, this family is run out of wine, and Jesus says, "My time has not yet come. My time has not yet come," in chapters 7 and 8. "This isn't my time, it's your time," Jesus says. Well, finally here in John 12, Jesus says, "The time has come. Now's the time for the Son of Man to be glorified." Now, here early on, where is it? Son of Man to be glorified in verse 23, and then later in verse 34, we have this idea of the Son of Man is glorified, or the Son of Man is lifted up. Those two phrases are kind of used interchangeably, despite the fact that they're different, and they have subtly different meanings. To be lifted up is this nice, ambiguous, vague phrase that John uses. To be lifted up means to be honored or to be recognized. The word in Greek is literally to ascend, or to lift up, to hold up. But it also can be used to describe a person who is going to be crucified. A person who's crucified is lifted up in the sense that, they're nailed onto a cross, and then that crossbeam is stood up in the ground, and they're displayed as a way of shaming them, as a way of humiliating them. They're being killed in this public, excruciating way. Jesus deliberately uses this language to kind of almost misdirect people. He says the Son of Man is to be lifted up. Well, lifted up in what way, Jesus? Which way do you mean? Now, of course, what Jesus means is both. He means literally lifted physically up off the ground on a cross in a humiliating way. But that cross is the glory of God. That cross represents the wisdom of God that human wisdom would call foolishness. Here in John chapter 12, John brings together these themes of death and light and darkness and starts to reveal that. The death that Jesus is about to die does a number of things all at the same time. First of all, Jesus says his death is going to call all people onto himself. So he is going to assemble a gathering and assemble a following in the means in which he dies, which seems kind of confusing, because to understand crucifixion doesn't call anybody or kind of woo them to you. It might drive them away from you. Crucifixion's a horrible way to die. And yet, paradoxically, Jesus is saying that he's going to call all people to myself through the way in which he dies. The second paradox here is that Jesus says he is going to bring glory to God in the way that he dies. And so how is that even possible, that God would be glorified by this death? The third thing Jesus says here in the text is that the ruler of this world in verse 31 is going to be driven out in the manner in which Jesus dies. Okay, so what is all this saying? Jesus is saying that when The Greeks finally come and say, hey, listen, we would like to talk to Jesus too. Jesus recognizes the time has come, that this movement that he has been a part of is now already, even before Jesus has died on the cross, started to reach outside of the Jewish community. It's started to go out past the nation of Israel, the people for whom Jesus is the anointed Messiah. Jesus' renown and his fame is already starting to spread. The time has come. And then Jesus calls out this paradoxical way of death as a way that is going to bring life. He uses an analogy of a seed, which of course even makes sense to us today. That of course seeds that you find in those packages that you buy at the store are technically dead. There's nothing alive in them. They're dead. I've recently with the garden club planted some seeds that have been in an envelope for more than 10 years. And yet these dead little seeds, when you put them in the ground and when you water them under the right conditions, suddenly the seed dies and new life is born. That's what Jesus is talking about here. The death that he dies on the cross is a death that brings life. That Jesus, through his death on the cross, kicks out the ruler of this world. Well, who's he talking about? Jesus is talking about Satan. That there is a way in which the enemy of God has been ruling this earth through sin and through death. And the death that Jesus is going to die on the cross in a few days is going to break the hold of death over the community of faith. It is going to introduce this new way of life. And it's such a paradox that here on this side of the cross, here just a few days before Jesus is to die, those who are listening, they can't seem to make sense of it. In fact, there's a really interesting thing happening here. The crowd standing there, even the crowd that are actually physically listening to Jesus and hearing this, only some of them hear the voice. Only some of them recognize it. Some of them think, oh, it was just thunder. Some of them think, oh, an angel was talking. Others of them recognize it was God bearing witness that Jesus truly does have divine approval for this mission that he has already sought out. So that even the people there, not all of them understood. That's a comfort today, that even those of us today, that as we're reading the story and it doesn't make sense necessarily, that's the way of this text. It's a challenge. It's sometimes confusing. It's a mystery, this mission that Jesus is on. And then after this, Jesus departed and hid himself. That's kind of a confusing thought too. That why would Jesus at this time in his life seek to be hidden from his followers? Well, even Jesus needed to withdraw. Even Jesus, in this tremendously intense time of his physical life on earth, needed time to withdraw from crowds, time to withdraw to speak to his Father in heaven through prayer. And that's an invitation for us as well through this difficult time. We'll see you next time.